Well. All right. Oops. Not sequestered in my God, why is it? Okay. The door was not closing. All right. Oh, and I'm not plugged in yet either. Oh, God, I'm just falling apart. Give me a moment. All right, there we go. Now I'm not going to melt inside this freaking closet. Okay. Oh, why is my chair not moving? I swear, the world is falling apart. Okay. Is my laptop on silent mode? Yes, it is. Good. All right. At least some things are working as intended. Okay. Well. Let's get to some ward, shall we? My God, I barely remember what was happening. Did I record last week? I don't think I did. I don't know. Regardless, let's do it. Arc 20, Last, Chapter 6. I had no idea what was real anymore. I couldn't trust anything. Red and gold lines spiderwebbing across my vision made me think something in my mind had broken, even more than those fundamental parts of me had been lost or... Wait, even more than those... My God, this sentence doesn't make sense. Hold on. Even more than those fundamental parts of me had been lost or irrevocably damaged. Even more than those fundamental parts of me... That had been lost? Red and gold lines spiderwebbing across my vision made me think something in my mind had broken, even more than those fundamental parts of me that had been lost or I think there's supposed to be a that in there, otherwise the sentence doesn't make sense. No idea what was real anymore. I couldn't trust anything. Red and gold lines spiderwebbing across my vision made me think something in my mind had broken, more than those fundamental parts of me that had been lost or irrevocably damaged. I dove in, prepared to make myself more of an immediate threat. Part of the reason she seemed to have stalled was that she had accumulated a fair bit of damage. That damage was my target. I couldn't be sure of anything, but I was reasonably confident that she did need to recover if she was hurt. No way would the Endbringers have operated like they had for as long as they had if they didn't. No way would the Endbringers slowed their aggression against Scion in the middle phases of the fighting, falling back to change up how they came at him if they didn't need rests, in a sense. This was how I had to interpret. All right, let's back get to change up how they came at him if they didn't need rests, in a sense. This was how I had to interpret the situation and the fight, grounding every thought. Anticipate, be flexible, find the weaknesses. She barely seemed to notice me as I flew in, driving my force field into the crisscrossed patchwork at her shoulder, where her body was revealed to be hollow, a crisscross latticework of feathers forming the shape of a thin, sculpted shoulder. Some of that lattice was broken, and I dug in, tearing it open wider. I felt telekinesis roll over me, grabbing at parts of my sleeve that stuck out, a prong at my shoulder where the decorations attached, my hood. With flight, a wrenching of my body, and my force field gripping the floor and hauling me to one side, I tore myself free of that faint grip, getting some distance from the Simorg. She folded wings around herself, a shield, while rubble circled around her, making the approach complicated. I wasn't the only one she'd gripped. She'd reached out across the room, targeting everyone present who wasn't one of the compromised individuals she'd drawn in. Chevalier was here, and put his sword out like a wall, some of his squadron gripping the channel that bifurcated the two great blades. The screaming in my ears reached a new pitch. The Simorg unfurled her wings and raised one long, thin arm, and the blade twitched, the blade turning so it was no longer perpendicular to the ground. The material of his costume and the blade seemed resistant to her efforts. Good thing, because if it hadn't been, she might have turned his weapon so the blade was poised to catch anyone and everyone she threw. Rubble moved. Metal pipes lifted themselves free from piles of debris and pointed, poised to catch the people she was about to fling. The lens I wore highlighted it where I couldn't see it with my own eyes in the gloom. Where things moved, the lines were more unsure, while fixtures like pillars and doorways were marked out, firm. I flew, ready to intercept, or to be in a position to intercept. I still had the flash gun, and I clipped it to my belt, where it swung and banged against my leg as I turned in the air. It was another weak point, a thing she could grab, but there wasn't a great way to handle carrying the thing. She'd done this before. I'd watched videos and simulations of prior Simorg encounters before they were taken down. I'd seen these mass telekinetic flings before, modeled in three-dimensional programs, each individual stripped down to being a dull gray render of a human being without costume, colors, gender, or personality. Always toward the end of fights, if she did it at all. Always only after she'd sang long enough, after she had her hooks in. This is real, I thought to myself. The thoughts couldn't have sounded further from being the proud, confident heroine I'd dreamed of being. Once. There's a once at the end of that sentence. She had her hooks in. This is real, I thought to myself. The thoughts couldn't have sounded further from being the proud, confident heroine I'd dreamed of being once. Tremulous, wavering, and a half step away from a downward spiral. What had I done that I hadn't realized I was doing? I couldn't clearly remember if I'd dropped that piece of rubble on my sister. I'd forgotten stuff, or not forgotten. I'd failed to think of things. Like my gun. I'd left it behind. Could really have used it now. I'd failed to think of things. Like my gun. I'd left it behind. Could have really used it now. Someone screamed, as she fought to get free and couldn't. She wore a costume in yellow and black, almost flipped from my own, a swooping bird icon on the chest with fins at the exterior, all flowing from the lines and patterns on the costume itself. She reached out for a teammate's hand, her fingertips grazing his as the two of them were held immobile. I wasn't sure what she hoped to do if she did get a hold of her teammate, but I couldn't go fly to her rescue. That was a trap. Everything was a trap. This, too, is real. This is what she does. This is why, if you're even thinking of participating in any fights against the Simorg at any point in time, they'd give you the rundown. They'd prepare us well in advance. "What do I do?" Sveta called out. "Grab," started, my voice drowned out by other people shouting, yelling. My sentence interrupted as the Simorg flung them. Not forward, not back, but in various directions. I took flight, trying to catch the man the woman in the bird costume had been reaching for. They tell you in the prep materials that you will always feel one step behind. I got a firm grip on his hand. I felt the jolt as he jerked, as he roared in pain, the noise joining the cacophony around us. Sveta was doing more, catching rubble, people. I'd meant to tell her to grab the bits that stuck out. If the Manton effect extended just past her tendrils to any clothing she wore, there was a chance she could impart just a bit of it to spikes, fins, capes, and other matter. The Simorg, as far as I knew, didn't grab flesh. I was trying to track the dangers and see what she was doing in the midst of this chaos when I saw a wobbly golden outline. Unlike so many of the others, it wasn't moving. A pipe that stuck out of a pile of rubble. I flew, hard, moving lower to the ground and letting go of the guy I'd grabbed. I had been flying. Flew, hard, moving lower to the ground and letting go of the guy I'd grabbed. I had been flying hard enough that he rolled on landing, rolled on that dislocated arm. They warn you that you'll do things that seem callous or inhuman, that she'll make you do those things as one of her 100 ways of getting to you. I rationalized it, telling myself the air resistance was too much, that short length of pipe too threatening. It twitched, and I thought for a moment it was about to come for me. Then it pulled free, lunging left, lunging right, a feint. Reach! I communicated, prayed, pled. The fragile one reached out, using the form with the widest breadth, the me from a period that was trying to move a ruined mess of body, one that could occupy a whole couch. The force field slammed into my back and the back of my head hard, and the hand caught the pipe out of the air. It was only after that I looked at the target, Dinah Alcott. The boom of Chevalier's cannon drowned out all sounds that weren't the scream in my head. The Simorgh blocked the shot with almost casual ease, moving a chunk of pillar into the way. Another chunk of rubble hit Dinah, something I couldn't have anticipated, catching her in what looked like the solar plexus. She fell, hand to her stomach. It hadn't been moving as fast as other chunks, but it was still something. The preparation material said we'd fail, we'd be whittled down, and it would perpetually feel like we could do more if only we were at our best, while she guaranteed that we wouldn't be at our best.
Hey, Kid Cassandra.
Cattletail. Wow. Tattletale. Let's just do that over. While she guaranteed that we wouldn't be at our best. Oh, let me get that out of there, too. Only we were at our best, while she guaranteed that we wouldn't be at our best.
Hey, Kid Cassandra,
Tattletale called out.
Don't call me that. Move! Run! You're a sitting duck! And she really wants duck for last meal before she ends the world, Imp crowed. Run where? Run laps! I'm not even joking. Don't fall in the hole in the floor. What are you? I'm not an idiot. No, but you're about to be blind. Gru!
Oh, I blew out there.
Gru!
Yeah, blew out.
What are you? I'm not an idiot. No, but you're about to be blind. Gru!
I need to back off on that.
What are you? I'm not an idiot. No, but you're about to be blind. Gru!
Gru created a wave of darkness, hitting the curved wall of the open space. It banked, rolling out and expanding.
I don't suppose you could steal her powers, or...
No, Gru said. I saw another chunk of rubble move and put myself in its way, kicking it with my force field to drive it into the ground. It still rolled a bit from residual momentum. Again, I looked for the target. There wasn't one, or if there was, it was subtle. I'm losing my mind. The Mather's giant had gone dormant, backing up and falling into a crouch, knees to her chest. Thin, with near-white hair, gaunt features, and only a bit of loose attire that had been fabricated for her by Shin in the glorious textures and patterns that Shin seemed to be so good at making. She had a few wounds from the earlier fighting. No indication she was messing with us again. This was just us and the Simorgh.
The hell not,
Tattletale called out. I'd need Valkyrie to undo the tweaks she did, and she's gone, he told us.
What fucking tweaks?
It's complicated. Needed... Christ! Gru narrowly avoided getting smashed as a section of pillar high off the ground fell to hit the floor. To try something. To try and shake the memories those new powers were attached to. Didn't work.
Well, that's really fucking inconvenient, Tattletale said.
Really fucking sorry to inconvenience you, Tats, he retorted. I would rather have been in a tornado without my force field than in the midst of this. When things weren't flying right toward my face, they were flying in from the side, the ceiling was crumbling, or stuff was happening below me. It was impossible to watch every avenue of attack, and 10 seconds of this was to drive just about anyone to the edge of panic, let alone anyone who had had a scream. Only one had. And 10 seconds of this was enough to drive just about anyone to the edge of panic, let alone anyone who had a scream in their head and a shared hallucination fresh in their memory. Most were taking cover. Only a few of us were insane enough to be out here, trying to catch people or stop her. The rubble that had been marked out earlier was flying through the air at speeds that severed body parts they hit. Sveta recoiled, dropping someone as something hit her arm. In her case, at least, the tendrils were flexible enough to absorb the worst of the impact, but she retracted the strands and her arm hung limp at her side, red and wounded. This feels hopeless. The study materials they gave out said it would feel hopeless, more than any other fight against Endbringers. But it really feels hopeless. And all we could do was to keep fighting. Keep giving our all, up until the last drops of blood had been shed. I saw blue motes, and I had to look for Capricorn. He was coming up the stairs with Vista, Narwhal, and others. She'd known they were coming, which meant she was already doing something to fuck with them. Chevalier lined up his cannon blade, then fired again, then a third time. Each shot did appreciable damage to the Simorgh, the kind of damage we needed to be doing. Please, the whisper oozed out of the hiss of the gun.
Tattletale,
I called out. I took a position between Byron's group and the Undersiders, one eye on the dark cloud Dinah hid within.
You did good with the syringe, kiddo. Let's just hope the heroes have this.
Narwhal opened with a volley of 12 force field spikes. They plunged into the Simorgh's wing and stuck there. Chevalier was recovering, reloading shots while crouching by a pillar. He was talking to an injured guy. The injured guy with spider legs, who was wearing a hero's costume, who didn't look out of his mind. I'm losing my mind. I don't have enough things to hold on to. Some things are working and some aren't. The handbooks assumed if we were stuck in the fights for this long after everything had gone to shit, we were goners already.
Talk to me, to us. Why is she running laps? Metaphor, Tattletale called out. Metaphor? She's running laps for a metaphor? No, there's a metaphor for this.
I flew down as rubble that was leaning against the wall shifted, threatening to fall on Byron's group. It put me out of earshot of Tattletale. This was not a time for fucking metaphors. Vista shrank the rubble. I flew down and caught the rubble before it could collapse on the group. It shrunk with every passing second.
Thanks, Big V.
I huffed for breath. I met her eyes, and I saw a deep sadness there. I met Byron's, and I saw that he looked shaken. I couldn't imagine how I looked. I was pretty sure the cut on my head was bleeding again, and I couldn't take the time to get the coagulant out. Or had I given that to Dinah? I was losing my grip on reality. This entire battlefield had ceased to feel like a place where A flowed to B flowed to C. It was chaos and madness. I took a breath, and my broken collarbone pulled apart, which came with a feeling like the attached bits of muscle that led from my neck down were tearing. I gasped.
Vic?
Byron asked.
Hey, you guys managing?
I asked, trying not to gasp and finding myself sounding too casual in the process. I could barely get my thoughts in order.
How's Cryptid?
He's doing the stuff,
And no, Byron said. He dropped his voice in volume so he could be heard by Vista and me alone. I might have a phobia about being crushed by giant rocks after Tristan had ended his own life by way of Giant. God damn it. I might have a phobia about being crushed by giant rocks after Tristan had ended his own life by way of Giant. God damn it. I might have a phobia about being crushed by giant rocks after Tristan had ended his own life by way of giant rock. It's fine if you need to go, I told him. I couldn't live with myself. Just don't blame me if I'm not at my peak. That's in the protocols, I assured him. Pamphlets, videos, and prep material us while getting our heads checked out to see if we were fit to fight the Sea Morgue. Oh, I got those, he said. We got those, Tristan and me. I kind of didn't pay attention. I thought this was the one Endbringer I'd never willingly fight. Rule is, don't blame yourself. Don't get down on yourself. Do what you can. If you have to run before you're a danger to do that. We get through this, then we move on. If you let it weigh on you, it'll destroy you. Gotta love protocols, he murmured, between breaths so heavy it was like he already had a lot weighing on him. It'll destroy you. Gotta love protocols, he murmured, between breaths so heavy it was like he already had a lot weighing on him. Nice and simple. Don't ever have to think. He was breathing hard. He lifted his helmet to fix his hair where it had fallen across his face and been stuck there, and flinched as a small stone dinked. God damn it. He lifted his helmet to fix his hair where it had fallen across his face and been stuck there, and flinched as a small stone dinged off of the metal at the side of his head.
Hey, Vista said. If you're wanting to keep going...
I am. Nope, faster.
Hey, Vista said. If you're wanting to keep going...
I am, Byron said, so fast it felt forced.
Giant constellation. Work with me.
He nodded. I left them behind. There were other bases to cover. Tattletale and her fucking metaphor, for one. She'd acted like she knew what she was doing when she'd ordered Dinah to run around like a headless chicken, and as far as I was concerned, we really fucking needed someone who knew what they were doing. Or someone who was convincing enough at pretending to know that they could keep us all centered and organized. I caught one chunk of rubble and blocked another with my force field to spare the undersiders who'd hunkered down beside some cover. I was momentarily without my force field, and something hit me square in the back. I dropped to my knees, grunting. One of Rachel's dogs collapsed to the ground just to my left. Not fallen, but lying down near where I was, to use its body to protect me. Ow. Fuck me, ow. My legs still seemed to work, and it was more in the ribs than anything, but fucked up ribs on the left side of my body in conjunction with a fucked up collarbone made me feel like the left side of my torso was going to break free of the rest of me. Thanks, dog, I managed. Good dog. It only kept one eye closed, head turned away from the storm of flying materials. It wasn't like a whirlwind where things flew in what seemed to be a fairly steady circle. There were things flying crosswise, pieces of costume, pieces of pillar, computer stuff, wires, wood, concrete, tile, papers. They smacked into one another, into us. I saw someone get hit by something on his left side, stumble, and get hit on his right. Golem was on Chevalier's team and was trying to create concrete hands to wall off the constant assault, so the bulk of the wardens at one end of the facility only needed to protect themselves from the front. Tattletale, I grunted. Fuck, I couldn't raise my voice anymore. Tattletale was on the other side of the cover I leaned against, while the dog lay at my feet, taking its beating. I heard her voice.
Metaphor. We're playing chess. Each and...
Freaking Windows update. Shut up. Snooze. Stop making noise. Alright. I heard her voice.
Metaphor. We're playing chess.
Was there? Okay. Whatever. Start there. While the dog lay at my feet, taking its beating. I heard her voice.
Metaphor. We're playing chess. Each and every one of us, we've got a board, and we're sitting on the other side of the table from the all-knowing angel. She can think ahead to endgame, and we don't know how to play.
Dinah knows? I asked.
Our kid Cassandra is flailing in the dark compared to our lady in silver. Sorry.
We have more pieces on the board.
Oh, hun, I'm not so sure we do,
Tattletale said.
Too many of us are compromised. She's had a good enough look at enough of us to know what moves we make or could make until the very end.
Then what? I asked.
She can't see the kid. Not easily. Not while she's juggling everything else. She's refining her plan against Contessa while she's juggling 1,000 of us. The kid Cassandra makes that harder and casts a shadow over everything she interacts with.
Too hard. Too hard. Those two words were like a whisper, a product of the environment, except no rasp of rubble on concrete or metal on metal had helped to form the sounds that coincidentally became words. No, it was the chaotic noise in my head, the half-formed thoughts, dangerously close to me being unable to distinguish my own thoughts from the words she was putting in my head. It took effort to think past the screaming in my head, to put together what Tattletale was saying. The screaming was incessant. My every nerve was on edge. The past was regret. The present was stress well beyond what I'd ever thought I could tolerate, and the future was almost certain doom. She can't see Dinah. She can't see us if we interact with Dinah. The Simorgh shattered Narwhal's force fields in the air. Shards struck people who were trying to close the distance in that 20th of a second that it took Narwhal to cancel the force fields and make the shards disappear. That's why I could get the syringe to the giant, I said. She didn't see me to stop me? Tattletale nodded.
Think so.
If it was that easy, we would have beat her with regularity. She didn't see me to stop me? Tattletale nodded.
Think so.
If it was that easy, we would have beat her with regularity a long time ago. Fuck, my ribs hurt. My collarbone hurt. I shifted position and was left breathless when the bone of one part of my fractured collarbone grated against the other part, making itself felt through my entire upper body and neck.
It's not that easy. She knows she'll be blind, here and there. She collects and stacks the pieces. At a certain point, she's got so many factors on her side she can make blind moves and still win. That's where she's at now. There's no king for us to take, no weak point to capitalize on, no silver bullet or special trick,
Tattletale said.
Tattletale, queen of pep talks,
Imp proclaimed.
You gotta get out there, Vicky,
Tattletale said.
I sent Rachel to protect the kid, but there's only so much she can do. Tell the wardens to hold off until...
Got it, I interrupted. Even the act of going from a resting position lying against rubble to a resting position floating in the air was a little too much movement for me. I didn't have the buzz of adrenaline, and I needed it at this point. My entire body felt heavy, even though I was actively floating. I flew, gritting my teeth as I shifted position. Byron, Chev, I spoke, getting about as much volume as I could manage with my body refusing to cooperate.
Tattletale says to hold off. Wait for the signal.
We can't afford to, Chevalier bellowed. You can't do anything, Chevalier, I told him. You'll do more harm than good. My people are out there fighting, he raised his voice. There was no motion in it. Then good. My people are out there fighting, he raised his voice. There was an emotion in it that was my first hint that he wasn't doing so hot. The front line capes were out there. Strikers, brutes, breakers, changers. They were waging war against the Simorg's renegade capes. The broken, the lost, the delirious. I'd seen 2 of them, and I was pretty sure at least one had been completely off her rocker. I wasn't sure I trusted my take on things with the one I'd executed. Dinah had been there, at least she hadn't complained. The 2 thoughts connected. Was that another domino? Another piece the Simorg had set up early to put into play now? Wait for the signal! I raised my voice as much as I was able, curling knees to chest and wincing at the effort that shout had taken. I prayed he'd listen. Dinah. I could only guess where she was, and I had no idea if she'd backtracked or taken a funny route to make herself harder to anticipate. I could assume Tattletale had given the Kid Cassandra a bit of a heads up about the blindness. The darkness was hard to fly in. Harder when the force field reached out and touched a wall faster than I'd anticipated, arresting my movement too. Every jarring movement hurt. Where was she? If the chaotic, worse-than-a-tornado storm of flying debris had been bad before, I was navigating it blind now. I forged my way through, feeling this way and that. A hand grabbed my force field. I flinched. Then I felt the pull. I relented, flying down to meet the source. I hugged Sveta as I met her at the edge of the darkness. "Careful," she said. I pulled back. "I'm losing control as this fight goes on." The tendrils did look agitated. "I'll end up like my old self at this rate." The words were frightening to hear. I knew how much she'd needed the body she'd gained. "Nah," I said. "You've been through this journey. You know that a fix is possible." "It was 1,000,000 to 1 odds it would work." "It was better odds than that." "Even 25% odds. It doesn't matter," she said. It mattered to her. "I need to find Rachel and Dinah," I told her. "I can fish." "Please, be careful. I think some of the renegade capes disappeared into this darkness." I watched as the fight went on. Rain was helping guard the injured. Chastity was unconscious or dead, and her body was being dragged by Cassie. I had memories in my head from what the Mathers giant had showed me that felt more real than what I was looking at right now. "Fuck!" Sveta swore, pulling back. She withdrew tendrils, and her arm went from being 100 individual strands, each no longer than my finger, to being arm-shaped again, each strand fitting into a configuration that had far too many holes in it. Some of the holes welled with blood, the blood running down her arm to her fingers. "Something's in there." "It's blood play," I said. That was the domino. One of many, tipped well before, okay. "It's blood play," I said. That was the domino. One of many, tipped well before the Simorg couldn't see what she was doing, because she'd seen the blind spot coming, and she'd set herself up to have the maximal number of answers to throw into that spot. I knew I was mixing metaphors, chess and dominoes. I knew I was thinking her of... Hail hydrate. Hey, Vale. How's it going? Bot. I knew I was mixing metaphors, chess and dominoes. I knew I was thinking of her as a she when the Endbringer was more of a natural disaster. "That collarbone of yours looks really fucking bad, Vic," Sveta said, eyeing my chest. "She's in there, winging her lasers around, probably going to hit Dinah by chance. I just told the wardens to hold off until they got the signal, but if Dinah's gone or out, then they won't get that signal." "She's not there," Sveta told me.
How sure are you? I'm not. 80%? 75%? 60? But if I keep reaching out and getting those reaching pieces of me sliced off or smashed, I think I'm going to break, and I'll be more of a danger to anyone here than blood play is.
I looked around. Above us, moving through the darkness, Dragon's craft came down through one of the holes in the ceiling. The Simorgh was ready for her, and pillars that held up the ceiling broke. Like spears being used against horses in the medieval age, the pillars interrupted Dragon's descent. The dragon craft's mouth opened and unloaded a hail of what might have been grenades. Each one detonated into a brilliant white explosion with a smoky black exterior to the explosions, like smoke contained strictly to the explosion's surface. Too much of it was blocked, stopped by an intervening power from the swarm of renegade capes around the Simorgh. Where the fuck was Dinah? The Simorgh... Yeah, it's nice to have you here, even if it's only for a bit. Swarm of renegade capes around the Simorgh. Where the fuck was Dinah? The Simorgh was pushing back. Don't like how I said that. Swarm of renegade capes around the Simorgh. Where the fuck was Dinah? The Simorgh was pushing back, taking out a cape every 5 to 10 seconds, starting with the stragglers. The reality we saw. She connected to Fortuna and she screamed, and the world screamed with her. We were entirely at her mercy. She's not a person. She's not a person. She's a force of nature, of fate, one that will destroy us, one that can't be beat. Not my voice, that last one. She was taking us to pieces, but she wasn't utterly destroying us, because she wanted a future where we were her playthings. You're humanizing her again, Victoria. We needed to do more damage. To do that, we needed Dinah. To get Dinah, we needed Into the Darkness, and Gru wasn't there to dismiss it. Rachel was supposedly in there. Where the fuck was Rachel? This screaming in my head. Fuck, fuckity, fuck. We were running out of time. Sveta laid a hand against my shoulder. I jumped. I felt the surface of her hand shifting, tendrils sliding over tendrils. Rachel was with Dinah. Rachel would have her dogs with. One was still with Tattletale and the others, shielding them. She hadn't called it. She had others. Rachel and Rachel's dogs were with her. Rachel's dog. Tail and the others, shielding them. She hadn't called it. She had others. Rachel and Rachel's dog were with her, I said. No way, Sveta said. Off to our left, Bloodplay flew out of the darkness. She had her eyes set on her. She had her eyes set on... Oh, she set her eyes on her. Man, I read that way wrong. Sveta said. Off to our left, Bloodplay flew out of the darkness. She set her eyes on her. When Sveta reached out, Bloodplay ducked back into the darkness. The darkness covered the back half of the room. Had Dinah fallen into the hole after all? A bloody smear lying next to my sister, who had a chunk of rubble on top of her? Or had she jumped? I flew into the darkness. Sveta followed, one hand still touching my arm, on my left side. It tugged momentarily on the shoulder, which was attached in turn to my aching ribs and my collarbone. I could feel hot blood down my front, soaking into and beneath my belt line. Whatever fights followed from this, I wasn't sure I had it in me to participate. Which was insane when put together with the fact I was planning on Whatever fights followed from this, I wasn't sure I had it in me to participate. Which was insane when put together with the fact I was planning on executing a massive number of people, many of them faces I knew. Many more were people who wouldn't accept it without complaint. No, they'd fight, and I'd have to stand my ground. But that was after. I found the hole, Grazing the floor with the fingers at the end of my good arm, I went beneath, hooked around the hole, and skimmed the ceiling, until I was in a hallway, a floor beneath the massive room. Teacher's panopticon of propaganda. Not here. I took another route, moving between floors, my search made harder by the fact the darkness on the floor above us was pouring down into the hole, so I couldn't even stand in one hallway and look past to see the hallway on the other side. But it forced the Simorg to make her plays blind too. I kept searching, aware every second counted. Every minute, the thought crossed my mind. I wasn't sure who it belonged to. Running out of time. She's about to leave, and we haven't done damage.
"Let me,"
Sveta said.
"if you can."
She unfurled, her entire body breaking down into tendrils. Clothes were shed, as was armor. As a mass, she flung herself into the center of the darkness. I saw a hand reach out, another, reaching blindly as she fell. Long seconds passed. The screaming in my head was thin, faint. Sister. My sister was at the bottom of the hole, maybe. All I had to do was look. Would I be more at peace if I could verify her as dead, or if I could verify I wasn't a killer? It made it so tempting, but it also meant risking having to set eyes on her, which meant facing dark thoughts, which meant... Something grabbed me, and my first thought was panacea. I grabbed it back, hard, with force field. The moment I realized it was Sveta, I let go, guilt washing over me. I followed the hand. Down 2 floors to a side room partially lit. Dinah and Rachel sat beside a badly injured mutant dog. From the blood, it looked like blood play had sliced it. The descent into the hole might have been a tactical decision, or a bit of a post-injury mishap.
"We need you,"
I told Dinah.
"I don't have much. My head feels like it's going to split open."
"One more," I told her. "One move, we make it count." I saw the doubt on her face. She nodded, her mouth set into a grim line.
"Want a ride?"
I asked Rachel. She shook her head. I scooped up Dinah, glanced at Sveta, saw Sveta's hurt as she held one arm to a bicep where tendrils were especially active.
"Sorry,"
I told her.
"It's fine,"
she said in a tone that suggested it wasn't, with a faint look of betrayal on her face. The procedures for these missions suggest we're supposed to avoid holding grudges, avoid blame, for ourselves and for others. Mistakes happen when you're pushed to your limit by a psychic scream. But that felt like shallow justification. I took flight, carrying Dinah up. Sveta's hands, blind, reached up and grazed me, but she didn't hold on to me. Maybe she didn't trust me to do it. Up into the darkness, through it, and into a battlefield I hated more than I'd hated any other, and I'd seen a good few. Against an enemy I despised more than anything. Someone who hurt my friends with the ease I breathed. With more ease than I breathed, if I considered the damage to my collarbone and ribs.
"Now,"
I whispered as we emerged.
"Use your power now."
Sveta emerged from the darkness, but she did it as a violent...
"Now,"
I whispered as we emerged.
"Use your power now."
Sveta emerged from the darkness, but she did it as violence personified. I could see tendrils thrashing, lashing, throwing other tendrils. Sveta emerged from the darkness, but she did it as violence personified. I could see tendrils thrashing, lashing, throwing under... Why do I keep saying under? Throwing other Sveta
tendrils.
Emerged from the darkness, but she did it as violence personified. I could see tendrils thrashing, lashing, throwing other tendrils that had been severed. She caught blood play and dashed blood play into the ground.
What question?
Dinah asked. I couldn't bring myself to speak, seeing Sveta lose all control. The Simorg was dismantling the dragon craft, pulling tech together. The Wardens were fighting a losing battle. The area was thick with blue motes. Damsel's group was present, Damsel trying to get in close.
What question?
Kick her ass, or kick her ass more? I asked, quiet. There was a pause.
Just kicking her ass will suffice.
I used my aura, putting every iota of violent, righteous, angry sentiment I was feeling and transmitting it to every cape present. Dinah directed. It gave us what we needed to make a final set of moves without her seeing them coming. I'm going to restate that. Dinah, just angry sentiment I was feeling and transmitting it to every cape present. Dinah directed. It gave us what we needed to make a final set of moves without her seeing them coming. Okay. That was, dear God, what chapter was that? 20.6. Last. Oh, no. 20.6 last. And 20.6 last. All right. What time we got? 6:47. Not bad. Bring me another. Ugh, I hate having to resize the window every time I make a new one. God damn. I said god damn. All right. Yeah, that's the button. That's, yep. Okay. And you go up there. Cool. Perfect. All right. Give me one moment here while I hail hydrate. All right. Next chapter. Let's freaking go. Arc 20. Last. Chapter 7. My first instinct on seeing every cape present make their moves was that I'd played a pivotal role in the Simorg's master stroke. It was too much, altogether, with too many people in the line of fire, all on my signal. Solar Stare's power gushed into the open lattice and filled the hollow of the Simorg's body, right on target, until Chevalier's second shot hit and jolted her, sending her flying back a good 15 feet. Excess liquid splashed dangerously close to where Tattletale and the capes she'd gathered around herself. Chevalier's second shot hit and jolted her, sending her flying back a good 15 feet. Excess liquid splashed dangerously close to where Tattletale and the capes she'd gathered around herself were hunkered down. 3 Tinkers were using their tech together in what I could only assume was a cross-the-beams maneuver, but they missed in the initial moments, raking the already damaged ceiling I'd damaged in earlier fighting, and brought chunks down near the maneuver, but they missed in the initial moments, raking the already damaged ceiling I'd damaged in earlier fighting, and brought chunks down near the primary group of Wardens. Damsel was moving unpredictably, using recoil to fling herself around, and Narwhal's force field spikes were traveling in the same airspace. But this battlefield wasn't just about those capes. Vista warped the residual splash of molten gold and the cascade of falling rock. Hookline and Disjoint were at the ready, Hookline grabbing Damsel and pulling her out of the way of the spikes, while Disjoint reached out with dismembered... okay. Joint were at the ready, Hookline grabbing Damsel and pulling her out of the way of the spikes, while Disjoint reached out with dismembered limbs and shoved capes out of the way. There were others. Advance Guard had a few members nearby, with Signal Fire hurling out a homing fireball that embedded itself in the Simorg's stomach and proceeded to suck in other airborne projectiles, concentrating them in one area. Resound had a sonic blast that she'd channeled into that same spot. Solar Stare's power erupted into super-hot flame. Much of it was within the Simorg herself, and there were spots, especially where she was wounded, where the glow of heat within her made her silver body glow orange and yellow. Byron's motes detonated into mist, sweeping over the Simorg. Vista controlled the mist's path, concentrating it. Dust and smoke particles froze into frost-like lattices, and her exterior was super-chilled at the same time she burned from within. She folded wings around her, and they snapped and cracked with the movement as they drew around her body, frozen on the outside, with her body glowing red-hot from within. A single crack at the lattice at one shoulder widened, inching down toward one nippleless breast, just from the stresses. There was no scream in my head. For the moment, for this final batch of attacks, she wasn't fighting. She was barely trying to defend herself, and she was taking a lot of punishment. To see it, I could... She was barely trying to defend herself, and she was taking a lot of punishment. To see it, I could imagine the Simorg had vacated the shell of her body, and this was a Simorg-shaped statue we were so focused on taking down. Solar Stare's flames began to glow brighter. And this was a Simorg-shaped statue we were so focused on taking down. Solar Stare's flames began to glow brighter, shedding motes of light not too different from Byron's. The motes began to glow brighter, until Gru covered them up, shrouding the Simorg in darkness. She chose that moment to move, throwing herself back and away, closer to Sveta, Dinah, and I, closer to the hole. Dragon, still poised partially in the part of the hole that extended to upper floors, lunged down, driving the full weight of a quadruped mech the size of a house into the Simorg. The motes of light spilled out, almost rolling as they danced along the floor into the darkness. I shielded my eyes, twisting my head away, and hooked my good arm around Dinah's head to shield her as well, just in case. Gru's darkness did away with the worst of it, but it was still bright, and the brightness lasted. Even though Dinah and I weren't touching ground, I could feel the rumble through the air as a whole section of the facility gave way. I chanced a look, using just one eye, and I saw that the hole in the floor had widened, the fight between Dragon and the Simorg continuing below.
"Sveta," I said, "what can I do?" "Nothing," she told me. "Except maybe don't use the aura like that again. I almost hurt someone."
"Okay," I said, quiet.
"Go fight. I'll manage,"
she said, as she struggled to pull herself together in what looked like one step forward, one step back, her body pulling itself apart into spaghetti tangles within a second or two of her getting a body part... too long. She struggled to pull herself together in what looked like one step forward, one step back, her body pulling itself apart into spaghetti tangles within a second or two of her getting a body part into roughly the right shape. Struggled to pull herself together in what looked like one step forward, one step back, her body pulling itself apart into spaghetti tangles within a second or two of her getting a body part into roughly the right shape.
I've managed for a long time.
I placed Dinah on the ground, then flew.
No!
Chevalier called out. The call wasn't just for me. There were others who were rushing forward, ready to descend for the next stage of the fight. Damsel was one. I paused, looking back.
Hold!
He called out, his voice deep, commanding.
5 seconds!
I remained where I was. My heartbeat pounded, and I felt like it was enough that people... I remained where I was. My heartbeat pounded, and I felt like it was enough that people would be able to see my pulse at my neck, my vision threatening to go dark like I'd stood up too fast. Damsel, in her own way, was struggling too. In this, at least, we were somewhat alike. She didn't want to stop. She looked at me, and I saw recognition on her face. Too soft to be Damsel recognizing the pain-in-the-ass heroine Antares. That fleeting look was replaced by a look of disgust, then rage, then something even deeper than rage. She brought a hand to her head, and belatedly seemed to remember she had giant, multi-jointed knives for fingers, and couldn't actually run her fingers through her hair or hold her head. They remained poised there. The floor below us erupted into a tide of blue light. I stepped back from the hole in the floor, shielding my face. Self-destruct? The light dissipated, then came again, this time with a different kind of flow. Instead of a single mass of what could have been plasma or liquid flame, it was 100 streams that bent at angles and wove into and through one another like a great angular braid. As they fired, the beams transitioned to become less blue and more red. The light dissipated.
Go!
Chevalier called out. I went, giving Damsel a wide berth. Good thing, too, because she used her power to slash out with a wide, fan-like blast that might have maybe grazed me if I'd followed my initial course. I gave her that extra second to get where she was going. Wasn't worth the risk to follow too soon after. It ended up making something of a difference. The ground cracked all around us, and segments of floor began coming down in chunks. More holes, more damage. A whole pillar was pulled beneath. As everything began to cascade down, the Simorgh rose back up, no longer grappling with Dragon. Legend, too, chose a moment to come flying in. 2 of the big 3 wardens were present. I wasn't sure if Narwhal qualified as a stand-in for Valkyrie, but it was good to see. The collapse was being rectified. Cracks shrunk, holes diminished, and supports raised by way of force field and giant stone hands. Byron shifted gears, drawing on the floor with moats before solidifying them. He'd done the same with ice back when we'd been fighting the masked titans, but now he paved a floor of rock with sweeping, shallow, conch-like spirals. She used her telekinesis, and more cracks began to creep all around us.
She doesn't have her hooks in you, but she...
Tattletale's voice was cut off as she got clear of a cascade of bits of ceiling high above us. The environment. Tattletale had been telling us that, yes, we were free of the Simorgh's influence, but that didn't extend to the facility. She supposedly screamed to gather data, and she used the data to inform her precognition. We momentarily had the edge because everything about our movements flowed from Dinah and Dinah, screamed to gather data, and she used the data to inform her precognition. We momentarily had the edge because everything about our movements flowed from Dinah, and Dinah being a blind spot. But the environment... She'd already worked out those calculations, already gathered the data, and knew the ins and outs of cause and effect here. The entire facility around her was putty in her hands. I checked on Damsel, who was on the floor below, using a continuous, shallow blast around herself to ward off falling debris. She gave me a hard look. I looked away. I could see the weapons that were being brought to bear against the Simorgh here. Legends' lasers, Dragon's tech, Solar Stare's beam. A single punch from me didn't matter. Not here.
"Damsel!"
I called out. Her lips moved, her expression twisting even further.
"Torso!"
I called down to her. Again she replied. The roar of her power and the sounds around us drowned her out. Too far away, and I wasn't getting any closer while she was in a mood. Too dangerous. I took flight, looking for Torso. If I couldn't do the necessary damage, maybe I could at least enable the people who could. Torso was the heaviest hitter I could think of off the top of my head. I found Deathchester, peeking out through the hallway the Undersiders had been in. Gibbet was creating half-circles of debris around and behind the Simorgh. Not that it helped a ton, when she could use telekinesis or wade through them, breaking them in the process. When one was picked up to be thrown, Gibbet reduced the scale of that chunk of floor or pillar, letting it shrink to nothingness before it could be used to bludgeon someone. Trophy Wife was assisting the wounded. Side piece, I spotted her with some of the attacking forces. The room went from dark to bright as Legend used another laser, hitting harder than I'd seen him do, especially in confined quarters. The screaming was finding its way back into my head. Small, slow, steady, but it was creeping in, building up, and it was doing it faster than it had initially done. Our window is closing.
"Antares!"
I heard the voice. Win. I turned to look at him, but I didn't have the capacity to shout back.
"Your gun!"
I gave him a hand signal, somewhere between a point to go and a thumbs up, with a belated nod to confirm. I had to hope the damage we were doing was enough, that we could put her down or keep her down for long enough she wouldn't be up for a fight with Titan Fortuna. I would have called out, but it was hard to shout when the left side of my rib cage felt like it was hanging on by luck more than anything. Down or keep her down for long enough she wouldn't be up for a fight with Titan Fortuna. I would have called out, but it was hard to shout when the left side of my rib cage felt like it was hanging on by luck more than anything. Instead, I landed beside Trophy Wife.
"Where's Torso?"
She pointed. I flew through the crowd, so I didn't have to jog. Torso had fallen into a crack in the floor and gotten wedged inside. 2 capes were struggling to get him out. Chevalier fired another cannon blade shot. The ringing in my ears that followed joined in with the scream. I watched as the blade was raised high, then brought down, cleaving into the Simorgh's already damaged shoulder. With my force field, I did what I could to help lift Torso up, crushing the jutting portions of poured concrete floor to allow him to slide freely up. It was mostly a brute from foresight that did the lifting part.
"Torso,"
I said. He turned his eyes toward me, mismatched, painted on the surface of his oversized head.
"Can I try flying you?"
I asked. He gave me a thumbs up. Okay. Here was the trick, then. I disengaged from my force field, visualizing and forming the cocoon shape, the rib cage splayed open so I could fly out. Then I turned it toward Torso. Force field arms reached out, grabbing him under the armpits, where his arms stuck out of the heavy armor that covered his head and upper body only. Cage splayed open so I could fly out. Then I turned it toward Torso. Force field arms reached out, grabbing him under the armpits, where his arms stuck out of the heavy armor that covered head and upper body only. I lifted him into the opening in the force field. His head lolled back, smashing into the force field. I felt it go, dashed to smithereens. For what felt like 3, 4, maybe even 5 seconds, my force field didn't come back online. A problem that had only ever occurred with Scion-level hits and Ashley blasts.
"Don't move your head," I told him.
He turned that stupid fucking face my way, an uneven, shakily drawn smile on the lower face, dull and oblivious. "Please," I told him, "this is important." Again, I repeated the exercise, lifting him, hands reaching inside to brace his head. The area shook. He flinched. His head moved to tear free of the bracing grip, and he bashed my force field into oblivion with a small tap of the back of his head against the shoulder of it. I clenched my fist.
"Losing battle, Antares," Disjoint called out. "Torso's a professional fuck-up. Whatever clever plan you've got for him, he'll fuck it up."
Torso awkwardly rubbed the back of his head, like he was slightly embarrassed or abashed by this.
"Fuck it," I said.
I used my force field, disengaging from it, but this time, instead of giving him a ride, I used
"Fuck it," I said.
I used my force field, disengaging from it. Oops. I just started over. He was slightly embarrassed or abashed by this.
"Fuck it,"
I said. I used my force field, disengaging from it, but this time, instead of giving him a ride, I used 6 hands to pick him up. 2 at the armpits, 2 at the wrists, 2 at the thighs. I held him like I would a battering ram.
"Don't move. Let me try this. I'll do my best to keep you safe," I told him.
The guy felt more awkward to hold than my 12 tons of gun, and I couldn't even get to grips with how or why. It wasn't that he was heavier. It was that the weight was weird.
"Won't work,"
Disjoint told me.
"It's worth a shot," I told him. "Godspeed," Disjoint said, "but it won't work."
Flying with Torso felt like an extension of being Torso. Keeping my grip was tough, because the weight seemed to shift every few seconds, to the point he nearly tore out of my grip twice in the time it took me to get 10 feet higher in the air, matching the Simorg's height. Flying forward posed the same problems, only worse, because it complicated up and down and somehow made it impossible to keep from curving left or right. The screaming in my head was worse now, compounded by the stress of the moment. I tried to maintain my course in flying toward the Simorg, and she veered one direction, not even an apparent consequence of my approach, but because of the way the fight was going. A pillar shattered, the rebar exposed as the exterior came away in jagged splinters. To keep my force field going, I used Torso as something of a human shield, drawing the limbs in. Chunks of concrete struck his giant head and upper body and bounced off, with no harm done. When I tried to reorient, he nearly tore free of my grip again. By the time I had my bearings and was flying straight, the Simorg was relocating, taking some evasive action and crashing through Narwhal's force fields as Legend opened fire. Off to the side, Damsel was back out of the hole. She used her power to run up the side of a pillar, then raked it with a lick of her power to create a handhold, claw fingers gripping into the edge, waiting for the Simorg to draw in closer. Which, I thought, might be my best bet. Flying was too hard like this. The area glowed as Solarstare used her power again. "Come on," I murmured. The screaming was getting worse. I saw the Simorg block Crystal Clear's thrown crystal with a bit of debris. She wasn't even facing him, though I wasn't sure how much that mattered. Had he been here when I'd used my power, or was she getting to the point where she was one step ahead again? Other Foresight members were joining in. Annalise was holding 2 tinker blades I knew he hadn't made himself, each one looking more like cutouts in reality, showing only a startling white nothingness that stood at stark contrast to the black. I knew he hadn't made himself, each one looking more like cutouts in reality, showing only a startling white nothingness that stood at stark. I knew he hadn't made himself, each one looking more like cutouts in reality, showing only a startling white nothingness that stood at stark contrast to the black of Gru's power, wherever it lingered. A lot of capes were choosing safe ground, waiting for their opportunities to step in. The exact opposite of the initial problem we'd had, where we all attacked at once and almost screwed each other up. All right, hail hydrate. Sinuses are drying out. Opportunities to step in. The exact opposite of the initial problem we'd had. Wow, that was a fun sound my throat just made. Opportunities to step in. The exact opposite of the initial problem we'd had, where we all attacked at once and almost screwed each other up. The danger now was that we'd all wait, and the opportunities wouldn't line up. Had to make them. I flew up higher, still holding Torso, and watched as the Simorgh either floated or was driven one way or the other. Solar Stare's liquid beam ignited to fire, and the Simorgh floated back from it. Damsel leaped from her perch, blasting to move more laterally than vertically. A chunk of debris flew at her, and she shot it out of the air. It put her off course, and she had to blast again to break her fall. She landed on rubble and tumbled to the ground. I descended, holding my parahuman battering ram. It was akin to flying into a heavy headwind with the wretch as to the ground. Holding my parahuman battering ram. It was akin to flying into a heavy headwind with the wretch at its least aerodynamic, veering, tugging, torso flexed, arm extending forward, like he was going to fucking punch the Simorgh, and the movement, combined with the weirdness of Torso's fluctuating center of balance, tore him from my grip. He sailed downward, a top-heavy missile with the exact opposite trajectory of Damsel and her blasts, more down than forward. The Simorgh floated a matter of opposite trajectory of Damsel and her blasts, more down than forward. The Simorgh floated a matter of feet to the right. Torso slammed face first into the ground, where it had been reinforced by Byron's power. "Fuck!" I swore, immediately regretting the volume of the swear word as my chest erupted in pain. Torso got to his feet and began a shaky attempt at chasing the Simorgh, even though she flew well above where he could reach. Okay, not Torso. Other opportunities. Damsel? I floated down to her. "You do not want to be near me right now," Damsel growled. She tried to stand and failed. "Want a ride?" I asked. "I want nothing from you." "There's a truce," I told her. "The whole idea is we work together. Let me help you kick ass." "What's the point of stopping her if it costs me everything?" she asked. She found her feet. With her claw tips on the ground, she propped herself up, so she didn't have to put her weight on her leg. It looked like her knee tips on the ground, she propped herself up, so she didn't have to put her weight on her leg. It looked like it was her knee that was messed up, her dress in tatters where her power had ripped into it at the sides. Tips on the ground, she propped herself up, so she didn't have to put her weight on her leg. It looked like her knee that was messed up, her dress in tatters where her power had ripped into it at the sides. "Saving the world?" I asked. She gave me a get real look. "Leaving a legacy?" "I'll leave a legacy on my terms. I won't give her an inch." Her. She wasn't talking about the Simorgh. She was talking about Ashley. Our Ashley. Breakthroughs. "That's the vector the Simorgh chose to attack you through?" I asked. "Swansong? None of your business." "And from your attitude, it's working?" I asked. My voice was a little thinner than I wanted, as I found myself catching my breath with the pain of saying more than a few words at a time. She pointed her claws at me. I met her eyes with my own. They were entirely white, rimmed with black eyeliner and mascara that one of her teammates had put on her, smudged at one corner. One eye had blood that had settled into the hollow of the socket, like a tear cast in blood and frozen in time. Doing this, not giving an inch, it makes you weaker, not stronger. It's fragile, being inflexible.
Fuck you,
she said, uncharacteristically vulgar, blunt, with a minimum of pride or herself in the line. I didn't really have a response to it either.
You just want me to cave, so she comes out.
She went out peacefully, proudly, in a damn cool way, I started. Legend's beam rocked the room. There was a squeal that followed, even though the laser was silent. My head rang, and I pressed a hand to my temple.
And I have little interest in disturbing her. I don't believe you.
Will you let me help you, please? She scowled and shook her head. I took off, leaving her behind, flying toward the Endbringer, who was getting her bearings, smashing relay from foresight. I could understand it. The terror, the panic, the fear of losing herself. She was a personality that flowed from a single source, singular. I could understand it. The terror, the panic, the fear of losing herself. She was a personality that flowed from a singular source, and when she and Ashley had been alive, they'd shared memories and dreams. The information they'd provided had helped the Wardens get an inkling of how the dream space worked, the crystal landscape, and the agent's place in all of it. It was just so fucking tragic that she stood at that crossroads and took this road. I flew past Sveta, who had pulled herself back and was pulling herself back together, and reached the edge of the Warden's defensive line. The impossible whirlwind of telekinetically flung objects was starting up again. She was blocking more of what we were putting out. Her chest gaped open, the laser objects was starting up again. She was blocking more of what we were putting out. Her chest gaped open. Wait, where the fuck? Oh, there it is. Objects was starting up again. She was blocking more of what we were putting out. Her chest gaped open. The laser had flensed away flesh, revealing more of the feather lattice across her arm and upper body. Half of her face was damaged, revealing bone like dark, tarnished silver, and her wings were, by contrast, mostly intact. Byron created a crag of stone, shoring up a pillar. The mist expanded out, flowing in a crossways direction, and the Simorg moved some of the mist, partially shaping it. It caught a laser.
"Hit the wing,"
Narwhal called out.
"You know the weak points."
"Where do you need me?" I asked. Chevalier turned his helmet toward me. He had shrunk his blade and was sliding ammunition into the chambers.
"Which one of you?"
he asked. "You see her?" I asked. He nodded.
"Like you, but made of light, smiling as much as you're not."
"Either one of us is available," I said.
"Protect us for now. She keeps..."
Debris was hurled our way. Narwhal raised a force field, and I floated up and out to shield the crowd.
"Just like that,"
he said. He turned to others and began barking orders.
"Vista, get us on target. The rest of you, if you can go on the offense, we need it now. Let the roof fall if you have to."
Byron obeyed, following the order, changing where he was putting the constellations. With that reaction, I knew he wasn't coming back to break through. Already, he was a part of the Warden's apparatus. Good. There were more capes coming up the stairs. The major malfunctions. Finale hung back, but Withdrawal vaulted over the pile of debris we were using for cover, while Caryatid got directions from Golem and found a position beside me, arms out and raised. Some of the braver capes were getting in close, and Withdrawal joined them, venturing into that telekinetic storm. Every movement he made was matched by a sound from finale, wincing in anticipation of collisions. Being in close, and Withdrawal joined them, venturing into that telekinetic storm. Every movement he made was matched by a sound from finale, wincing in anticipation of collisions, squeaking in alarm. Those sounds joined the battery of other shots she was voicing. One of the three tinkers from the Cross the Beams crew at one of the cubicles. This is alarm. Those sounds joined the battery of other shots she was voicing. One of the three tinkers from the Cross the Beams crew at one of the cubicles that teachers' old propaganda teams had worked from. God damn, Wildbow, please. Alarm. Those sounds joined the battery of other shots she was voicing. One of the three tinkers from the Cross the Beams crew at one of the cubicles that teachers' old propaganda teams had worked from was struck by a bit of rebar, speared to the pillar behind him. A moment later, the tinker tech they'd been working on was lifted free, held up in the air. The weapon fired, a beam aimed at us, forking, and I blocked the bulk of it, flying forward so I could catch more of it before it forked out and around me. Withdrawal moved close to the tinker tech, reaching, but failed to grab it. Not that it looked like he was really trying. He landed, hugging his syringe. Tinker tech, reaching, but failed to grab it. Not that it looked like he was really trying. He landed, hugging his syringe, and rolled with the landing, before crouching, both hands at a terminal on the syringe's side. The problem was, he had extremities that weren't covered by the Manton limit. She got a grip on the extended limbs with telekinesis and pinned him.
"Vista!"
Byron called out, his voice overlapping with my inarticulate cry. His constellation erupted into existence, a spike of blue, spiraling rock, like fossil or some seashell. Vista's power twisted it in the air, and it blocked the section of ceiling that would have taken Withdrawal's head off. Withdrawal disengaged from his tinker tech frame, and he held his hands over his head, pointing up at Byron Stone. It looked like he was holding a remote control. The Simorg was blocking 3 out of 4 of our moves now. We had enough big guns that she was still taking a beating, but it didn't feel like enough. I could believe she was 1 or 2 steps ahead of us, but it didn't feel like we were fighting a sea of toppling dominoes, wondering where they went or what the end result would look like. Not yet. Withdrawal went back to his syringe, slipped something into a chamber, oblivious to his surroundings as more debris fell around him. The chemical in his syringe turned yellow. Veins crawled across his costume, yellow, and the fabric turned yellow where it had been pink. The lenses shifted to orange. He couldn't lift his own syringe on his own, but he stood at Stop. Yellow where it had been pink. The lenses shifted color too, to orange. He couldn't lift his own syringe on his own, but he stood it on end, then stepped on a jutting bit at the side. The spray rained down over himself and his frame. A larger chunk of ceiling fell. I flew forward, ready to intercept, when more came down above the wardens. I caught smaller chunks and hit the bigger ones, slamming into them at full force to drive them away. Below me, capes were forming barriers overhead. Narwhal's force field, Golem's stone hands. Withdrawal was back in his frame now, covered in yellow that looked like he'd sloshed a bucket of paint over himself. As a chunk of broken concrete platform floated near him, he sprayed it with a gush from the syringe. The platform hit ground. I could see as he did more, spraying more things, hitting the tinker tech the Simorg was using and causing it to fall. Everything he sprayed came free of her telekinetic grip, and none of it was getting picked up again. The screaming in my head increased in intensity by the second, until I couldn't see straight. I closed my eyes, shaking my head, and almost missed a hail of metal spikes. Caryatid caught it instead. I would have replied, but someone touched my leg, pushing me aside. I obliged, floating over. Wynne, with a reduced-down version of my gun mounted on his power armor. He opened fire.
"Stay focused," Narwhal said. "We need a few more good hits before I feel good about this."
I wasn't sure we were going to get them. Withdrawal's trick with the paint was great, but it was defensive. For our offensive tricks, our heavy hitters were out. Dragon's mech was in pieces. Chevalier's... Hail Hydrate. But it was defensive. For our offensive tricks, our heavy hitters were out. Dragon's mech was in pieces. Chevalier... Started over. But it was defensive. For our offensive tricks, our heavy hitters were out. Dragon's mech was in pieces. Chevalier appeared to be out of ammunition. Damsel was injured and uncooperative. Torso was running around like an idiot. The Undersiders... Not enough straight combat powers. Deathchester, they didn't have much that did the kind of damage we needed to do. Rain was over there, I saw, awake, coherent, trying to help out, but Rain's power was at its weakest right now. He could create the blades, but he couldn't throw them. I raised my voice, hating myself for it.
"I'm going. I see a way. Back in a minute."
Not that we had a minute. Chevalier was venturing out of the barricade and glanced back at me. From behind his visor, he met my eyes. Then he looked at the Fragile One. He nodded, giving me permission. I flew over to the Undersiders, to the back line of Deathchester, and to Rain. Gibbet was cloning the painted bits of wall and floor that Withdrawal had covered with the stuff that made the rubble too slick for telekinesis to grab, walling off sections and piles so the Simorgh couldn't grab as much. The Simorgh, for her part, was gradually rising higher. She blocked the majority of what we put out there. Legend's beams, Wynn's gun, Gundek's barrage, Miss Militia's turret fire. I could feel it. She was poised to escape.
"Rain,"
I called out.
"I just got my sight back," he said. "Mostly. I don't know why I just lied. I'm half blind." "Will you trust me?" "Will it fuck her up?" he asked. "I hope so."
He nodded. Same thing I'd tried with Torso. My force field opened up. I picked up Rain. I pulled him inside the shell of the Fragile One. When she took off, I flew with. Rain held within, the weight of him pressing up against inside the shell of the Fragile One. When she took off, I flew with. Rain held within, the weight of him pressing against the inside of her. I was vulnerable. My front pressed against her back, but in fairness, so was he, leaning on me, on us, to the... I was vulnerable. Okay, I see how that's supposed to work. My front pressed against... Rain held within, the weight of him pressing against the inside of her. I was vulnerable, my front pressed against her back, but in fairness, so was he, leaning on me, on us, to this degree. The Simorgh rose up, toward the hole in the ceiling. I flew us to meet her. The golden beam lanced out beside me, carving out a line in the Simorgh's leg.
"Blade,"
I called out to Rain. I positioned an open mouth at his wrist, letting his hand out, teeth grazing his skin. He created the blade. The Simorgh twisted in the air, staring at us with eyes that had nothing to them. One silver eye and one perfect silver orb in a badly tarnished silver skull framed by wisps of hair. The ceiling, the wall, and pieces of everything around us pulled away, reoriented so the most ragged, pointed parts were poised towards us.
"Sorry, Rain," I whispered.
"No," he said, but his tone was serious,
not protesting. Can't back down, can't retreat. Wouldn't want to. Fuck her, Rain said. Beside me, his gaze was focused on her, unflinching. She's not a her. She's not a person. She doesn't have feelings, and she isn't fuckable. Not in the way where I can say, fuck you, and find a bit of strength in it. The Simorgh lunged, but not for the hole in the ceiling, for the floor. I dove, with enough force that I thought my collarbone would tear free, or that lightheadedness I was feeling might cause me to black out. The telekinetically poised debris collapsed in on us, barred the way. I didn't flinch, didn't waver. Someone shot one chunk. Others warped, veering out of the way. A pillar of black-blue Capricorn stone speared out below us, more a barrier than the chunks it shoved out of the way, then dissipated into motes of light a second later. We closed the distance, and the blade met the Simorgh's silver flesh, carving out a shimmering silver line, so close in color that it looked like there was no line at all, from shoulder to back to hip. There was a dull rumble as more of our surroundings tore away, ready to smash us, and I decided to make the call, to break away, to say, this is enough. I couldn't drop Rain or risk losing him, which meant I had to use me. I kicked out, hard, my foot meeting the silver line. It flared, bright, and the Simorgh's wings spread out around us until they were 90% of what I could see. The pain of the jolt reaching my ribs and collarbone made my vision split. I couldn't see straight. I stopped descending. I could feel the force field break as rubble hit it and groped out for Rain. "It's okay," Rain said. I blinked, struggling to get my focus back, as darkness creeped in around the edges. There was a crash far below us. I managed to focus my vision on a distant point, feeling like a baby trying to focus her eyes for the first time. Below us, more than half of the Simorgh's body, including one arm, some smaller wings, and both legs, lay on the basement level of the facility. The accumulated damage from the wardens, Rain, the beams, and the temperature shifts had added up enough for it to break away entirely. It lay there, limp and still. The rest of her had slipped away. Couldn't pursue. Rain was using his power to remain suspended in the air. I let the fragile one return and got a firm grip on him before floating up. That was it. I let the fragile one return and got a firm grip on him before floating up. That was it. That was the damage we could do. I floated up, slow and unsteady, wanting to be ready to let Rain catch me if I passed out and lost my flight and force field. Capes were standing at the edge, looking down, avoiding certain sections, not because the cracked ground was unsteady, but because Sveta was still there at one edge of the hole, back by the wall.
"Is that going to be enough?"
Legend asked. "No," Narwhal said. Legend flew down one floor, then out the hole in the exterior wall. "It may have to be good enough," Resound said. "It's not," Narwhal said. She looked haggard, ground down. The screaming in our heads was fading now. This time, I was pretty sure, it was because she was leaving, escaping. "There's an option," I said. "Tilt the balance."
"Committing wholesale to your idea?"
Chevalier asked. "If your enemy steps forward to throw a punch, pull them further forward. If they retreat, drive them back," I said. "Give them what they want. Too much of it."
"I think this is just giving them what they want,"
Chevalier said. Narwhal nodded. "What is this giving them?" Resound asked. "Fumehood and Dauntless," I said. "We ask them to join the Fortuna network."
"Putting us precariously close to the Titans completing their network," Chevalier said. which makes it critical that one of our contingency plans works.
But it gives Fortuna a chance of fighting the Simorgh off, I said. I swayed a little, even though I was flying.
We'll look into it, Chevalier said. Legend's chasing. If he can do enough damage...
Narwhal was already shaking her head. She didn't seem to think he could. It wasn't my place to make this call. I couldn't wrap this up, not in the condition I was in. I left them to it. I dropped down to the ground and released Rain. I saw him hold his wrist.
You okay?
I asked.
Broken, I think, he said. I don't think that's a trick we can use too often.
He'd had his hand stuck through the biggest opening I could provide while still protecting him, and I'd either let the teeth crush bone or something had hit his hand, and the force field hadn't given him leeway. I felt a pang of guilt and tried to push it away. There were protocols for Simorgh fights. We weren't supposed to dwell on guilt. But the fight was done. She'd escaped. Sveta was leaning against the wall, struggling to hold herself together.
Keep your distance, she said. Don't...
The tendril lashed out. I caught it with the Fragile One's force field hand. Oh, God damn it. I'm getting
Keep
hungry.
your distance, she said. Don't...
The tendril lashed out. I caught it with the Fragile One's force field hand. She jumped, startled at that, and immediately reacted with more lashing out, more grabs. I caught them, deflected them, let others grab me. I moved a fistful of caught tendrils into one hand and held them, making my steady approach.
We did it, I told her. If we get through tonight, this is fixable. I'm dangerous. Not to me, I told her. Remember? We hung out all the time. You can't hurt me.
Her tendrils weren't so much for striking as they were for grabbing and squeezing. My force field broke if struck, but held up to grabs and squeezes with little difficulty.
Can I
asked, as I got in close enough to have her in arm's reach.
Hug you? Can you? She asked.
I nodded, reaching out, before wincing, my fucking collarbone.
Yeah, she said,
sounding more like Sveta and less like panic distilled.
Yeah, I thought so, you idiot.
We did okay, I said.
Rain did well. You got Dinah. Now we have more to do. You need medical care, she said. So does Rain, looking at him.
More like herself by the second, stern, mom-ish, like a good mom who cared. As the agitation dwindled, so did the shifts in her tendrils. It still wasn't great, but yeah.
We can get that downstairs, I said. Do you want to, ride in the Fragile One? The Fragile One. My force field. Or are you confident? If Rain keeps his distance, I think we're okay. Maybe keep an eye out for me?
I nodded. As a group, we made our departure. On to the next phase of the plan. We passed by the heroes who were recovering, getting first aid, or taking a minute to light up cigarettes or get their grounding in whatever ways they needed to. Talking, being alone. Tonight's fight still wasn't done. On impulse, I looked back at Damsel. It didn't look like she was getting her bearings. She was alone, but she wasn't finding or gathering up a strength in it. We passed through the bulk of the wardens, and I kept an eye on Sveta's tendrils. Mostly, she seemed to have settled, though her body barely held a human shape. Oh, God. Pardon me. We passed through the bulk of the wardens, and I kept an eye on Sveta's tendrils. Mostly, she seemed to have settled, though her body barely held a human shape. There was no lashing out. Her focus, at least for the moment, was on taking care of us. Good showing, Precipice. Breakthrough, Golem said.
Thanks,
Rain said. I wished it was better. I wished I had confidence for this next phase, or that Fortuna would beat the Simorgh. Hopefully some combination of Legend, Dauntless, and Fumehood working with Fortuna would stall her or scare her off. Byron sat on a stone hand. Yep, he's on a stone hand. Of Legend, Dauntless, and Fumehood working with Fortuna would stall her or scare her off. Byron sat on a stone hand with Vista, his helmet off, his hair plastered to his head.
Coming?
Rain asked. Byron shook his head. A mite too tired. Worn out. Can you get on without me?
Absolutely, I said.
I looked at Vista.
Look after each other, okay?
Vista nodded, her hands resting on Byron's helmet, which sat in her lap. Out through the doors, down the stairs. One floor down, to the labs. To Chris and medical care, which I was all too happy to get. I wondered if they had a means of giving quick blood transfusions, because I was pretty sure my lightheadedness was due to a lack of the precious red stuff. The door slid open. Cryptid, leaning over the workshop bench, strewn with breakers, flasks, and haphazard machines, turned to look at us. He was half rat. A syringe clicked and plunged into his neck.
Do we have an audience?
I heard Riley's voice, cheery.
Show them, show them!
Chris, cryptid, stared at us.
Show them!
His posture, defensive, a glare on his face.
We've been working on all this time. I walked him through it. I do think it's a particular bit of genius, even if we're cutting it close,
Riley announced. The bad feeling in my gut solidified into something ugly.
Where is it, Cryptid?
I asked.
Didn't make it,
he told us.
Where is it, Cryptid?
I asked.
Didn't make it,
he told us. Okay, and that is 20.7. Oh, we are getting there. It is so close I can taste it. Okay, now I also have some retakes I need to do. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, let's see. Retakes for Octarine Sorcerer. This is going to be, they were in a DM. Okay. Yeah, 19.3, 19.4, okay. 2 lines of retakes. Take notes, mark 2. Okay. What is .md file? My dude. What is a .md file? Oh, apparently my phone can open it. Alright, it's the protocols, Amy. I'm compromised. You're suspect. The rules say... Victoria's voice, but kind of unsure. A little pleading. We'll send a clip of the first tone, because that was on point. Wait, didn't I already do these? I feel like I already did these. Maybe? Still open? Yes, okay, cool. No, I did not do them. Okay. Play the thing. No, you can't just... Oh my god.
It's the protocols, Amy. I'm comprised. You're suspect.
Oh, I did say comprised,
The
didn't
rules say...
Wow, why did I say comprised? Okay. Oops. Alright.
It's the protocols, Amy. I'm compromised. You're suspect. The rules say...
Let's see. We need a group.
We need a group, Crystal said. What do you even call something like that?
Yeah, it's starting to get toasty in here. Alright, so that was the first one. Now, the second. Couple voice samples of this one, only because it's a sideline hero that talks around this point too. Yeah, sideline heroes, I have no idea who they are. Okay, so get that file open. Oof, yeah, handful of things. All right, cool, got it. Let's do it.
Crystal said. What do you even call something like that?
Okay, these are the 19.4 retakes. Getting around necessitated leaping from one pile of rubble to a rooftop 5 feet down and 5 feet away. The guy turned, looking over his shoulder and back at the chasm. He turned toward me, angry. Oh, I need oh, whoops. Alright, so this is where I need the voice sample for the what the fuck was that. Gruff Hero 2, Gruff Hero 1. Oh dear. He says 2 things. He's not... Oh, cut out in the middle of the what the fuck was that? Okay. Alright, I guess he's not recurring in, or doesn't have multiple lines, so I'm just going to do the line.
What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?
Alright, now the gruff angry hero. Let's see, it's the, really, I'm okay with being the bad guy if it gets more of the Case 53s on board. If it just gets them here and helping, maybe that's what makes the difference. Well, that's Sveta. Oh, wait, oh, god damn it. Alright, so... I feel like this file is supposed to be formatted in some way that I'm not getting. Because that, yeah, alright, so... Okay. Gruff Angry Hero, he gets the files.
What the fuck was that?
What the fuck was... Oh yeah, he's Gruff, I got that, okay. And you...
It felt a lot like you throwing me into the air.
It felt a lot like you throwing me into the air. What the fuck was that? Alright.
What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?
Okay. Sveta voice said, I'm only being the bad guy instead of I'm okay being the bad guy. Oh god, I don't remember my voice for Gregor. He shows up like twice in Ward. Hope I get it right. Okay. So first Sveta. Really, I'm okay being the bad guy if it gets more of the Case 53s on board. If it just gets them here and helping, maybe that's what makes the difference. Gregor the Snail, huh?
You are Case 53. You are Case 53.
I think that's how his voice went. No, my narration voice said could instead of couldn't in there. Okay. 1 beam at first, then 5 maybe, then 20, and then 100, producing so many that there was nothing forward-facing that could emit a beam, so he sent them backwards, turning at sharp angles in the air until they were aimed at the right target. I looked down at him. Oh, sorry. Alright, let's see what's... I looked down at him, giving it a second so the night vision could trace his misshapen outline. I looked down at him, giving it a second so the night vision could trace his misshapen outline. A very phallic-looking snake, with a circumference matching many of the buildings around us. Okay, that's all of it. All right, well, I'm going to package these things up and get them to my editors. Yeah, cool. Let's see what's going on. I really want to do some streaming this weekend. Don't know when. Might be Friday or Saturday or Sunday or all three. We'll find out. But yeah, we'll see. Actually, I'm probably going to start playing Death Stranding this weekend, which I'm kind of interested in streaming. We shall see how that goes. Yeah. All right. Well, until then, thank you for watching. I shall see you next time.